Hi, everyone. For those of you in the live audience, I just want to tell you how much I hate you since I'm looking at frozen several inches of snow that is supposed to be snowed on top of the ice crust. So if you want to switch positions, just let me know. Give me a DM or whatever. So we have a really cool panel today with a broad cross section of people. We've got large companies like Verizon. We've got small companies like EDJX. We've got an international set of thought leaders, including Professor Yang from ShanghaiTech, who knows more than anybody, perhaps, about Edge, and certainly Edge in China. And we have one of the top analysts from IDC, namely Ghassan Abdo. So without further ado, let me just ask each of you to explain a little bit about what your organization does and why you even care about Edge, maybe in a minute or so. Kristina, I'll start with you.
I'm Kristina Serafim, Managing Director of the Verizon Ventures team. The Verizon Ventures team is the ventures team that invests in early stage companies on behalf of Verizon, early stage companies that are innovating in areas that are of strategic importance to various business units, product and technology units at Verizon. And the area which we have and continue to invest in for the last several years are very much tied to 5G, the edge, and use cases. Companies that are leveraging 5G, the mobile edge compute platform, and building applications that are of importance to various sectors that we're interested in as a company. And from my perspective, we have a lot of interesting companies that we are just, some are older investments because we've been having our interest in the space, like I said, for a few years, and some very recent exciting investments that we just closed that I'm excited to talk a little bit about later on.
Okay, great. Professor Yang, just a couple of minutes on yourself.
Yes, thank you, Joe. It's my great pleasure to be a member for this panel. And I also had the audience because I'm in a freezing room in Shanghai. And my name is Yang. I'm currently the director for Shanghai Institute of Fog Computing Technology and also a professor with ShanghaiTech University. I'm also a senior consultant for Shenzhen Smart City Technology Development Group. The reason I'm interested in 5G and Edge is that I actively participate in the IEEE ComSoc industry community board, chairing the 5G industry community now, and also active member for Fog Edge industry community. So I will share with you later on some more information about the 5G status in China, especially the Edge application in different areas. Thank you.
Sure, great. We all want to hear that. So Ghassan, how about you?
Hi, Ghassan Abdo. I'm Research Vice President at IDC, part of the Worldwide Telecom. So my research area looks at the intersection of three key technologies that underpin what we call rich media customer experience and low latency edge services. So these include SD-WAN, virtualized network services, content delivery network, and edge services, which I recently added to my program. There's a lot of demand from my client base, which includes traditional global telcos, content delivery network providers, and also cloud providers, the large ones. I do research across all these technology areas, but I also look at the trends that impact them. For instance, we're starting to see conversions, for instance, between CDN and SD-WAN, conversions between SD-WAN and edge services. So all of these things are part of the in-depth research that I do both quantitatively and qualitatively.
Cool. John, a little background on yourself and your company.
Sure, thanks, Joe. I'm John Cowan. I am the co-founder and CEO of an early stage software company called EDJX, or EDJX.io. We are the company that built the first distributed operating system for the edge with the view to accelerating code, data, and content, speaking of CDNs, Ghassan, in what we now know as the Internet of Things. And the edge is particularly important to us because it is really necessitated by the emergence of the Internet of Things. The edge is where all of this code and data and content is going to be processed, as defined as computers located in very close proximity to all of the connected things as we look forward to the future of the Internet.
Very cool. So I'm going to go around sort of in a circle again, and maybe start with you, Kristina. Like, one thing that is, from your opening remarks, what you said is that you're involved in sort of a variety of different venture investments and startups, and all that is great. The obvious question would be, how does Verizon Ventures tie into the core company and the massive, however many tens of billions of dollars are going into, spectrum and 5G build out and things like that? Are you a standalone entity? Do you have sort of the overall, company's best wishes at heart, or how does what you do tie in, and what's your main strategy around Edge?
So we are not a standalone fund. We are very much the corporate venture team that is part of Verizon. We invest off balance sheet, and we have a pretty strong strategic tie-in. Our investments have both a strategic and a financial objective, but they have to have both. On the strategic side, we work very closely with the various business unit, product, technology units, in order to validate that strategic alignment between the startups and Verizon, broadly speaking. And so we're very much a partner on behalf of the business units and the technology units to enable innovation through investments, through both partnership as well as investments in companies that we think are of strategic relevancy to Verizon, and that jointly can create greater strategic value through an investment vehicle, in addition to just working with the company on a customer basis or partnership basis.
So are there some things you can share about maybe recent investments, or obviously, not subject to non-disclosure, but anything you can let us know as to give us an example of what you're looking at and why you think it's a great strategic fit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some recent investments, as well as there are some older investments that are very much still relevant, though, to 5G and MEC. For example, one of my investments is a company called Omnisci. That's a Bay Area company that provides GPU analytics on the edge. So they work with companies like Verizon and other customers to enable real-time analytics. Recently, they announced actually some real-time analytic using their platform for use cases such as environmental and public safety uses, since we're speaking about smart city environment, for example. Another investment that just got recently closed, and it's announced really this week, is XFORMA, which is bi-directional charging platform. Really excited about that investment as well. We've worked with them for a while as a Verizon company, but on the investment side, it is a recent investment. And we are looking at the investment, again, like for all of the other deals we do, to enable that, to really further that relationship and create additional strategic value that goes beyond a partnership or a customer relationship alone. SwiftMile, also another investment that is leveraging 5G and Edge, is a charging infrastructure, another charging infrastructure for sustainable cities, very different technology than XFORMA. And there are a couple other investments that we have that are not announced yet, but very relevant for the topic we're discussing today for 5G Edge. A lot of our recent investments, and again, continuing to focus on this path, we're not a 5G fund per se, but because 5G and Edge are so important to Verizon, a lot of our investments tend to focus on the strategic alignment some of the startups that are innovating in this space have, and again, sure, leveraging AWS wavelength offering, as well as the 5G and
so I assume it's safe to say that a lot of Verizon's growth depends on mobile communications and IoT and 5G, and therefore anything that can help accelerate that is something that you would have under your purview and be of interest.
Yeah, I mean, the company beyond the ventures has a lot of large partnerships with companies that are of equal relevancy and importance to 5G and Edge. From the venture standpoint, we focus on earlier stage companies that are somewhere between late seed, very late pre-Series A stage to Series B, typically speaking, where we can become a very early partner in jointly shape their technology, jointly sometimes co-develop.
Sure,
market
makes a lot of sense, and we should have done like just a whole session on what Verizon is doing, because that's all fascinating. So Ghassan, given that Verizon is probably one of your clients, which you may or may not be able to disclose, and given that you probably do some sort of strategic review on their strategy, let me turn to you maybe and ask you, first of all, if you think that's the right strategy, or if not, I don't know if you can disclose it, but also what else is going on? Like, what is the latest and greatest? And you already mentioned some of the things, for example, the linkages between SD-WAN and, Edge. But what are the surprises or the new things that you've been seeing that our audience would love to hear about?
First of all, to underscore what Kristina said, there is definitely strong interest by all service providers, whether they're communication service providers, 5G, fixed, including Verizon. And I can say they are an important client of mine, including others as well, by CDN providers and cloud providers that I follow, the likes of AWS, Google, and Microsoft. Interesting that the viewpoint is a little bit different. So for telcos, to Kristina's point, it's really a monetization opportunity for the 5G infrastructure primarily. CDNs are a little bit different. They're really transforming, and I wrote a recent piece on it, what I call transformation into edge application delivery. Mm-hmm. So CDNs may disappear over time and they may become edge application delivery units. If you look at example, used to be organized as media and web divisions. They just reorganized into edge technology group and security technology group. We're starting to see a strong amount of communication coming from Cloudflare, from Fastly, from others that talk about delivering edge applications. The interesting part is CDNs are more interested in media and entertainment use cases, personalization, interactivity, low latency streaming, and they're also looking at adjacent markets like IoT and autonomous cars as well. The cloud providers, we know what they want. They want to make sure that their cloud native, essentially platform spans all the way to the edge, and they can take advantage of already infrastructure that is available coming from the likes of Verizon and others. And that's why we're seeing these type of partnerships. The interesting part, and I recently published the forecast on managed edge services, I'm seeing or observing 3 deployment models. One is what I call the on-premise or private, which is a deploy 5G in a private sense. This is really the very low latency use cases like healthcare, manufacturing. Then there is the service provider edge, the aggregation point of the 5G network, the edge of the fixed network, where the latencies probably are less than 25 milliseconds, could be smart cities, could be retail, or the CDN edge, because CDN's points of presence are distributed. So a lot of that, like I mentioned earlier, are going to be around media and entertainment use cases and adjacencies. Regardless, but what's interesting in all of the surveys we have done, and we've done many regarding edge services, security and performance tend to be the top concerns here, because that's understandable to a large extent.
So if I could just, what does that mean exactly? Because is there a theory that somehow the edge is not secure? Or just security is always a concern?
There is exposure. Yes, there is exposure at the edge, and performance is an issue because the edge does not benefit from the availability of scalable compute and storage capability like we have in cloud deployments, centralized deployments. Sure. So when you think about edge, it's typically expensive. They're typically smaller devices, though there is a limitation of how much you can do.
Yeah, so there are trade-offs, right, between latency and backhaul bandwidth needs versus scalable capacity in any given location. So let me thank you for that. Ghassan, and maybe let me ask Professor Yang, now that you've sort of heard a little bit about what's going on with, certainly big service providers here and sort of the analyst view, maybe if you can compare and contrast that to what's going on in China overall, which obviously in the 13th five-year plan, I assume in the 14th as well, 5G has been big. China, always does things not, so much the way we do here with, smaller companies, innovating, but more like as a national rollout with deep pockets. So what do you have to say about kind of from your perspective, what is new in China and what's different between China and maybe parts of the rest of the world?
Okay, thank you, Joe. In China, I think the biggest difference is that the government supports 5G a lot. So until September last year, in China, we have already 1 million base stations deployed across the whole country. For example, in Shenzhen, only one city, you've got 460K base station deployed last year. And also for Shanghai, by the end of last year, I heard that 600K base stations deployed. So the coverage of 5G is already for the whole China countryside. The number of customers, 5G customers, is about 395 million, about 1/3 of the total customer of mobile services.
Or more than the US population also.
Yeah, so we have a big population in China. I think the key is that the government is the sponsor of 5G. And also in terms of edge applications, I think the operators are very keen to deploy edge services. Like Ghassan said, they found this is an opportunity for operators to provide computing enhancements and the computing service for the end customers, not just a bandwidth connection or voice or video. So they are actually competing. The operators are competing with the traditional internet players like Alibaba, like Tencent, etc.
Right.
Yeah, so that's, I think, the key difference between the China's market and the European or US market. Also, just last year, 3 operators in China, they announced their own computing network strategy in the white papers. So I checked the structure of their service. It's not just the 5G network architecture. The 5G network architecture have been added by many computing devices or data centers inside the network structure. So I think that's a big opportunity for smaller companies or some traditional industry vectors to enjoy the benefits of 5G. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So, John, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions simultaneously, just for the sake of time, if I could. One is a little bit more about EDJX, because obviously I know you've got a very unique model in terms of a variety of things like multi-tenancy and microservices. So if you could cover that a little bit, and then maybe slide us into the conversation around smart cities and sort of the whole theory about, for a long time, at least, there was this perspective that there aren't that many compelling applications that need low latency or need the edge. Everything could be handled by hyperscale, more consolidated, centralized facilities. And now, obviously, virtually everyone thinks the reverse. So who's right, and what is EDJX doing about it?
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in there, Joe. So first of all, I think Ghassan is absolutely correct in his description of the cloud operators and the CDN operators. What's happening in the market right now is that the traditional CDN providers, known predominantly for accelerating content on the internet, and the cloud computing service providers known for hosting and application development like AWS, Microsoft, Google, the usual suspects, they're on a collision course toward the edge in being able to facilitate the orchestration and delivery of code and data in this Internet of Things, right? So this is the collision course between the two established markets. And as we observed this at EDJX, the reason why we built a distributed operating system and chose to pioneer in that space is because we believe that the real beachhead at the edge in IoT is going to be in the ability to accelerate code, data, and content at planet scale. So the way that Edge OS works is by bringing all of the cloud services down. I know Yang and Joe, you know a lot about fog computing, so you know what I'm talking about here, but bring the cloud services down to the distributed computer, whether that's located at a cell tower or a traffic cabinet, but then connect those nodes up in a peer-to-peer fashion that allow us to achieve true distribution of resources across a plurality of nodes interacting with one another. That's what we do. That's what we chose to do in order to innovate for where the future requirements would be for IoT. But it speaks really, I think, to the nature of smart cities and where this goes. So, if you can imagine, a city, with 100 or 200 or 300 different vendors, all with their own unique solutions, it's impossible for everybody to coexist on the limited real estate that exists on a rooftop or a street corner or a public park. So what's going to have to be embraced by the industry, including everybody, across PTC, is openness and collaboration, interoperability, multi-tenancy. It's impossible for every vendor to have their own edge compute located in a traffic cabinet. We must have shared distributed resources. So as you have this collection of sensors and devices and machines that produce all the data that need to be analyzed by the smart algorithms and applications, that must be done on infrastructure that is shared, generally speaking. That extends to the wireless carriers as well. Neutral host must come to North America, as an example. Not every vendor can have their own walled garden as we move and push code and data to the far edge of the network.
Okay, so what smart cities types of applications do you think fit that scenario, including neutral host?
The first and most, Joe, the first and most obvious is public safety, right? So, some of the foundational infrastructure projects that we're working on now speak right to the heart of things like Vision Zero, reducing traffic fatalities to nil in major urban environments, accelerating the ability for EMS to respond, producing, helping the application providers that do things like real-time threat assessment for first responders, all of the infrastructure and code execution that's required in order for those kinds of applications to exist in less than 10 milliseconds in some examples are some of the first crucial use cases, I think, that aren't just about cool apps, but are really about a better society in a smart city.
So just a quick question to follow up on that. One of the I think that cities are a great opportunity as well, especially when we think about 5G millimeter wave, because as you have limited propagation distance, the idea that somehow you're going to put a tower, every few hundred feet in the middle of farmland, where, no one is there and all you're trying to do is, check on crop health or whatever, doesn't seem likely. And conversely, the city has the kind of density, cities, sports arenas, obviously, where as you move into 5G or 6G and beyond, you can use that. But an obvious question is, given propagation issues in buildings, how do smart buildings tie in with smart cities? Like, how does that work? Or is it more like, outside for things like you're saying, Vision Zero, vehicle collision detection, and so forth?
I think it's the aggregation of all of that comprises the smart city, right? It's the digital infrastructure that's required for the smart applications to exist, across the landscape, however you define that, geographically in a city itself. But when we think about that, though, in the context of things, it also blends into what the digital experience is, right? So, whether we're talking about things like the future of augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse, all of these things are part and parcel of the next generation city, whether you want to call it smart, intelligent, interactive, you can pick whatever term you like, but the basic bottom line is that all of that requires a massive amount of data to be produced in order to be analyzed and turned into actionable intelligence by application service providers. And that's really what necessitates edge computing, particularly multi-tenant edge computing, to exist across the city landscape.
Okay, so I'm a horrible moderator because I could listen to any of you speak for like 7 hours, and I know we're going to be ending in a few minutes. But the next question would be, maybe if I can go to Kristina and say, Verizon's strategy around not just mobile edge, but multi-access edge computing, given some potential 5G limitations and what John just mentioned. Any thoughts on kind of, how the overall Verizon strategy ties into, both edge and 5G and FiOS and anything else you guys, fixed wireless, anything else you guys have going on?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm gonna bring it back to my role at Verizon from the ventures perspective. We are enabling companies that, specifically more startup companies that are leveraging the Verizon 5G edge with AWS Wavelength, for example, as another option to build real-time IoT connections and applications with ultra low latency. There are multiple industries where there are applications, definitely smart cities, healthcare. John went over some of the standard typical industries where we're focusing on these days, but essentially we're providing we enable the connectivity and the edge platform for companies that can leverage it to build applications. So from some perspective, we are agnostic as to the type of applications and the industry. We want to enable opportunities across smart city, metaverse, healthcare, security, and others to really leverage that and enable sometimes improve performance, other times enable applications that wouldn't exist without the Verizon 5G edge. Got
it. Makes sense. Professor Yang, any interesting stories briefly about what's going on in China around, you don't just put a couple of nodes up for a test bed. In China, they take a whole city, build it in the desert, as it were, and then, go ahead and use it as a test bed. So, but any interesting applications or, surprises in sort of the rollouts around smart cities?
Yes, I just inspired by John's talk. Actually, there's an interesting development for 5G edge application, especially for operators, about this multi-tenant system, the shared infrastructure. For example, in China, the China Unicom and China Telecom, for the first time, they collaborate on building up shared base stations. 400K base stations in China are shared by both operators. So I think this is a clear trend for the future 5G applications. Okay,
thank you. Ghassan, I think I'm going to give you the last deep insights to wrap up because we've got like another minute. So, my obvious question to you would be around not just the providers and vendors, but what kind of interest are you seeing from enterprises, cities, governments, militaries, where they're coming to you and saying, hey, we need to understand this better because we're thinking about doing X?
Yeah, I mean, we've conducted, like I suggested before, many surveys on edge services. We did it on behalf of a large provider that ended up publishing what they call the fourth industrial revolution. Discussion around the demand for 5 millisecond latency became quite prominent. I think the expectation from the enterprises tends to revolve around two issues: improved performance of legacy processes and applications by using edge. And the second one is compliance. Compliance tends to be more around storage and these things. So we hear those things quite often from enterprises. The demand is there. I think the market is going to grow. The issues that John raised regarding interoperability, transformability of application is a serious one. That's something that needs to be addressed industry-wide, I think.
Okay, very cool.
Joe, well, listen, if I could just one last thing, if I could add, just one last thing. I would say that, what you should do, if you can, is even some back of the napkin calculus on just how much infrastructure would need to be deployed in close proximity to achieve the kinds of latency that Ghassan is talking about, right? We're talking about orders of magnitude more infrastructure than most of us have contemplated ever in the history of our careers forward deployed to the edge. And, that creates a whole raft of other challenges for us collectively as an industry to try and address.
Yeah, that's the big challenge. So 10 years ago to the day, almost, Cloudonomics came out and I explored exactly those trade-offs. And the problem is that to cut latency in half takes 4 times as many nodes, subject to some trigonometric adaptations, and that quickly becomes prohibitively expensive, right? Unless you have revenue models around it and so forth. So, so with that, we thank you so much. What a great audience. Sorry that only John even has like the pretend background being in Hawaii.
It's not pretend.
But at least we have Hawaiian shirts on. And again, hope you enjoyed it. I know we're out of time. Please join me in thanking such a great panel with such deep insights.